All right, it's happening.
It's happening.
Oh my goodness, so exciting. I can't, this conversation has been, some time coming. A
I
lot.
know. I just love the excuse to sit and talk to you. It's been a minute.
It is awesome. And so as everybody is just signing on, welcome. We're about to have a juicy conversation today. So excited that you're joining us. So as you're tuning in, just drop a little hello in the chat. We see Marcella's here. Welcome, Marcella.
Whoop, whoop.
Welcome. And this is going to be a juicy conversation, y'all. So we bring in the real talk. We're bringing a little bit of cheesemint on top of that. But just going to lean into a lot of real talk. And I'm just so honored and blessed to always be in your presence. So
Oh,
it's going to be awesome.
stop. I love that you say living or juicy because it's literally in my bullet journal, like living juicy.
I love it.
Yes.
It is maybe one of my favorite words ever.
I know. It's so good. Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody. We're just going to let some people sign on. And so welcome. We see Isabella's up in here. BB, welcome. We're so excited to have you. And so as we can just let's start with some intros and we can dive in as people start to roll in. But first I'll start off and then I'll throw it over to Irene to talk about herself and kind of introduce her role and a little bit about also her journey though, which is really important. And I'm very excited to even learn more, even though we'll share a little bit about our history too and how we know each other. But we go way back. So spoiler alert. But to start off, welcome everyone. My name is Elaine Thompson Uten. I am one of the co-founders of Latinx Ed and very excited to welcome you here. A little bit about me is my birth, I guess the beginning of my story begins in Peru, and that's where I was born, but came over to the US and to the South when I was super young. And so really was raised in the South, Georgia, Arkansas, North Carolina, but North Carolina has been home for the longest. And part of that journey being a Latina in the South very much was a big narrative of trying to figure out who I was and how I fit into my community, and also trying to make sense of who I was as a leader and a learner. And so all of those pieces really come back to, and we'll share a little bit more about Latinx Ed in this conversation, but kind of why we started Latinx Ed and trying to help young folks and really overall our Latinx community really connect to our roots and find our place in our communities, but also thinking about educational equity and how do we improve and reimagine, honestly, systems that really serve the needs and recognize and honor the needs of our community. And so a little bit, actually, let me weave into how Irene and I met, because I went to UNC for undergrad. And I'm a first generation college student, so that was a whole other journey. But during that time, I actually joined a Latina-based, but not Latina exclusive sorority. And it was part of my journey of connecting with my roots and also trying to unpack who I was and also trying to get connected, because it was a lonely journey of trying to figure out how to do things like grad school and how to pursue a career that I was still trying to figure out, and just feeling like I was really craving Latina mentorship too. And Irina, you were presenting at a SLY event, which I was running back when I was an undergrad. And that's where I first saw you. I think I had already become an hermana, but you had come to speak at our event. And I was like, I knew who you were, but it was a moment for me because I was so excited to meet you. I remember coming up and being like, hey, hermana. I don't think we had met each other, but the fact that we were connected and I already felt so close to you was so powerful for me. But yeah, so that was a little bit, I feel like our connection there just continued to blossom as we've gone through a lot of different stages of life since college and since even grad school for me too. I feel like, Hermandad really supported me through all those journeys, whether that was through UNC to Harvard, etc., to even working abroad in South Korea. So full circle, even starting Latinx Ed, you've been such a huge mentor to me and to also our team, and because I think a lot of us know you. And so it's just been awesome to follow you and your journey and your work. And so that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to throw it over to you. And if you could share a little bit more about kind of your journey and where you're from, and just give us the good details.
Awesome. Yep. So Irene or Irene, both are perfectly fine. Godinez, I'm from Durham, Bull City, North Carolina. I was born in Greensboro, and my parents were migrant farm workers. So I was born when they were working on tobacco farm work. And it was at a time, you know, I was born and raised in Durham at a time when the Latinx population wasn't visible. And the few of us that there were, it was a pretty transient community. Um, and it was mostly men. And I remember, you know, I grew up on East Main Street, grew up in a Black community. And back in the day, and he's still around in Durham, Don Marcelo would go to Chicago or Texas to buy products that were familiar to our community. So like chiles, hojas para hacer tamales, Mexican food, basically. And then he would go literally canvassing door to door to like sell the product, because we all knew who we, like the other Latinx folks, mostly Mexican folks, um, that lived in Durham. And you know, all of that started to change in the mid 90s. And there's a lot that can be said about that growth. But when I was growing up, there were, and when I graduated in high school in 2000, there were no other Latinx people that graduated, not because they couldn't or what, it was just my sister and I. I think that was, and Alexandra Valladares actually. And we were all in the same high school at Hillside. And so, yeah, by the time that I got to college, I was hungry for a community that felt mine and where I could see myself reflected. And I went to 3 different colleges. First one didn't work out. It was in New York. And I remember feeling like such a failure. Like, why didn't this work out? And then I started school at ECU the spring of 2001. It was one of the only schools in North Carolina who accepted, or that accepted students in the spring semester. And so I was like, wherever, like, I just want to go to college. And so I went there. And I was there at the time when 9/11 happened. And it was after 9/11, that's when I realized I was truly an other in North Carolina. And I didn't feel safe. And, you know, there was an incident where a car full of white guys drove by me. I was looking all cute. I still remember the outfit I was wearing, walking home from campus, and they started throwing glass bottles at me and yelling racist shit. And that's when I felt like I can't stay here because I'm not safe. And I transferred to NC State. So by the time that I got to state, I was a junior. Um, and that's where I found my tribe. And I was telling you earlier, like, I'm part of that generation that started a lot of things on campus, because it was out of necessity, because otherwise we wouldn't have had community. And I'm anchored by my family, my parents, my siblings. Um, I co-parent, and I have an amazing 4-year-old who is the light of my life. You see all the Valentine stuff. Her middle name is Valentina. So I told her that Sunday was her day. So we still have celebration stuff. So yeah, that's me.
You have such a powerful story, and your journey always, yeah, thank you for sharing it first and foremost. Like, I feel like when I talk to also, even I guess hermanas too, you know, when we talk about what it was like to grow up in North Carolina at the time that we got
Yeah.
here, and everyone's journey is a little bit different, but especially for, it sounds like a lot of the journey that you had. For me, when I essentially spent middle school and high school in Waxhaw, North Carolina, which is Union County, very white, very rural. And those experiences and those journeys of being the only one in your class, or being the only Latina in your class, or being able to try to connect with people, or trying, I mean, so many really rude jokes and all of these things about always, you know, even though I'm Peruvian, being painted as Mexican, etc. Like, all those things became really challenging to try to piece together like who I was and how other people were seeing me, and this kind of dissonance with those perspectives felt really loud. But then also not really having a place to go to or someone to talk to about it. was part of my journey. And so I think being able to get connected, especially in college and then in grad school, to other women, especially, and other Latinas that were going through a similar journey was really important for me. So you're one of those. So thank you for being part of that journey. As we dive into our conversation today, which is real, we have actually brought some. All right, I would say mine is agua. I can't front. Okay, but Irina brought some coffee. So
I brought coffee for real.
Hey, I was going to do a slight plug for the Alumni of Color Conference at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Usually it's hosted every year. It's an amazing conference. Usually there's a cost to it. And this year it's because of COVID, unfortunately, had to shift to virtual, but that also made it completely free. So it's really exciting opportunity. So we'll drop a link there to be able to slide into that free conference. It's awesome. So a shameless plug. And then I just wanted to do a quick snapshot of our work. As we get started, just to kind of give people some context of Latinx Ed, Poder en Sí, and just kind of give you some context before we dive into we're going to dive even more, especially into Poder en Sí, and just get into all the amazing work that's been coming out of Poder and be able to unpack kind of this moment too and how important it is. So a little bit about Latinx Ed, we'll start there and I'll toss it over to you. So we're a nonprofit organization. We're serving North Carolina. We're also focused on, and our mission is to invest in Latinx students, educators, and families to expand and advance educational equity and opportunity here in North Carolina. And so we, especially these past years for us, have been really laying down our own framework and our own foundation for serving Latinx youth in particular, thinking about positive racial ethnic identity development. Like, what does it mean to be Latinos, Latinas, Latinx in the South? What does that mean? How are we connecting to that experience, and also doing a deeper dive into our individual respective cultures, and then also being able to talk about leadership and learning and how we get to really evolve in those roles. We also just launched last year our College y Consejos program, which is our college access work too. So being able to provide culturally relevant resources for Latinx 11th and 12th graders in North Carolina. So this is accessible to any student in North Carolina. Right now, starting next week, we're going to be offering free assistance for FAFSA for any Latinx 11th or 12th grader, or excuse me, specifically 12th graders, because that's what they're going through right now, is applying to FAFSA, and the deadline's coming up. So if you know a Latinx senior, send them our way. This is a really big opportunity. I remember when I was navigating the process, FAFSA was like, I felt like a completely foreign world. The language, just trying to figure it out and trying to do it by myself was really hard. So this is a way that you don't have to do it by yourself. So that's a little bit about us. We're also expanding our work across North Carolina, really thinking about how do we also change the educational system and really push folks to think differently about how they are creating policy, doing the work, creating environments for our families. And so that's a little bit about Latinx Ed. And already thank you to anyone who's supporting our work, whether that's through the support that you give us in the virtual world, but also any monetary support. It's all really appreciated. So just wanted to go ahead and thank all the supporters out there, and I'll turn it over to you, Irina, to explain a little bit about Poder en Sí.
Yeah, so Poder is the culmination of, at that time, 15 years of experience that I had in nonprofit sector in North Carolina. And but it's like the love letter to Latinx folks in North Carolina. And just, we've gotten to a place where we are a substantial community, and we are at a place where we can now begin to own a lot of the power that has been denied to us when we were a smaller community. And so Poder en Sí, the vision for our organization is that our community's power will be nurtured through revolutionary love in order to create confident and fulfilled individuals so that they may reach their highest aspirations. And so we do a lot of work with young people in rural areas across the state. Last year, we are what the IRS considers a 501c4 organization. So what that means is that we can independently support political candidates. So we are a C4 organization, and we run year-round programs. But what that means to me is that every year is election year. It really is. And so we're always building, seeking to build people power, not just through people's votes, because that matters, but that's just one tool in an arsenal of skills and leadership development opportunities. And so we're really just trying to invest in our folks, and make sure that they're aware of how power operates in the state, and then also invest in their own leadership development. And we've made a lot of different choices as an organization to make sure that we're really living into what we say we are, living into our values. And it's been challenging, but it's also so rewarding, to see that, you know, a lot of times we're trapped in systems that are broken and don't work. And the nonprofit sector really isn't that much different. But what I've learned is that we as leaders have a choice of whether we'll continue to operate from place of tradition and moving things because that's how it's always been done, or step outside of that comfort zone and say, no, like it doesn't have to be that way. And why should we, take people's labor as volunteers and not pay them? So that's like just one example of the things that we've done differently, and really making sure that we're investing in an intentional and meaningful way in our community. The end goal is to make sure that we are creating people power so that it doesn't matter who is elected into office, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or lo que sea, but that whomever's in office, that our gente always know that they're the ones in control, they're the ones with the power. And so we're just trying to put a mirror up to them to say, and this is what it is, like this is the power that you already have, let's just tease it out, let's invest in the growth of that.
Mm, awesome. I so many feelings. I think one thing that's resonating with what you're saying already is this theme and topic of power. And
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to some Brene Brown, because Brene is always dropping the real talk, especially about
Yeah.
leadership and organizations and all this stuff. It's all relevant to everything, honestly. It's just how people work and how people function. And I think policy is one of the ways that
Mm-hmm.
enables that work and community even. But one thing that she was pointing out was the different types of power, the power above, the power with, the power to, and the power within.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially that is kind of what I'm hearing already with Poder en Sí, is that it's really about power to and giving power to folks, and but also power within, and showing people how they are also have the power within themselves to be able
Absolutely.
to create that change in their community, and that power with of like, how are we doing this together, and really orchestrating, which very much is in sync with Latinx Ed and what our value system is too, especially as we're thinking about education. So I love that
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like the first topic that we kind of bringing to light here, as we think critically about power
Yeah.
and how people wield it. Because I think a lot of us have, or I will speak for myself, have had like a negative relationship with this idea of power. Like it feels icky sometimes, especially the way
Mm-hmm.
that it's manifested, but it's actually, in some ways, it can be negative, it can be neutral, it can be also really positive depending on how we're wielding it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first question that we had for you was kind of like to jumpstart us off. And I think part of this conversation is also demystifying policy
Yeah.
and the policy making process, because I know for me, that's not something I was trained on or exposed to. So I remember, especially in my younger years, feeling like a little bit intimidated by it, or feeling like it was something that
Yeah.
was untouchable. And so to start off with, our question for you is just, what are 3 things that you wish people knew about local and state policy or policy levers, and how they can either hinder or impact our community?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's always this like scarcity mentality, and we do this so much in the nonprofit sector. I've seen it happen my entire career in the immigrant justice sector, where like we feel that there can only be the one way, or there can only be the one organization, and like this one organization exists in Durham, and if you come here, then there's turf battles and like things that keep us, these like false barriers that we impose on ourselves to like keep us boxed in the name of like, honestly, it's ego. And so I think that there is enough work with like how broken our democracy, our society, like education, just like how broken things are for us to like try every tactic, support all the organizations that are there, like, and so right now, a key example is there's a bill that has been introduced in the North Carolina Senate, and it's kind of like in fact, they labeled it 2.0. It's basically like HB 370, essentially the same, where they're trying to strip powers from sheriffs if they don't inquire as to someone's immigration status when they're held for driving while impaired or for a similar level crime. Um, and there's already some groups, Latinx-led groups, that are leading a certain strategy, and that's going to be important. And then there is another group of us that are going to lead on a different strategy. And the narrative will, especially when it's like groups that are led by women, is, they're in competition with each other or whatever, when the reality is that um, we need all the different tactics in order to advance policy. We need an inside strategy, we need an outside strategy, we need to begin to think of the entire ecosystem and not like how something is impacting me or my organization only, but like thinking of what's the best thing for the entire community and for our entire state, right? And so to that end, like, there will be opportunities to like hit the streets and, amplify messaging at a wider level. So what I mean by that is every time that we see a rally, the rally isn't, especially around like a bill, the rally really, the target aren't the legislators. The targets are actually fellow North Carolinians, because the legislators right now, Democrats don't have the majority. So the bills that we want to see passed will likely not pass this year. And so we just have to think in different ways of, okay, if the win can't be the traditional passing certain legislation, what else can this win look like? And so I think that we just need to be thinking critically of, how can we take the strengths that we have as individuals and then like contribute it to the organizations that are around you on the issues that you care about in order to advance them. And especially if you're in a smaller place of North Carolina, you have that much more power. Like a lot of times people think that rural North Carolina, that there isn't a lot of power, but because it is a smaller place, that means that your voice is that much more impactful. If 10 of you in Sampson County suddenly call your legislators because there's a bill that you don't like that's introduced, they're going to feel like it's like a tsunami of people that are calling them. And so there's actually a lot of power in rural North Carolina. There's a lot of power at the local level of politics. And it's time that we begin to see ourselves in it by participating and hopefully also running for office.
Yeah. Wow. I'm taking notes over here. I hope everybody else is too, because this is some juicy, hot off the press, critical thinking here. And I think the one thing I'm taking notes because wait a minute, this is good stuff. And the one thing that one of the things I wrote down was thinking about there are many different ways to do or to
Yes.
accomplish.
In fact, we need all of those different ways. Like if we only do one strategy of going and lobbying and that's it, well, the legislators already know what you're going to think and what I'm going to think and what we're going to say based off how we look. So like we have to begin to think of how can we lean on people who share our values, who can also be messengers. In this case, one of the things that's probably most different about the strategy that Siembra and Poder are supporting, it's as opposed to some of the other Latinx groups that are moving a different strategy, is that we're gonna, there are so many people that say they support our community. Well, then it's time that we like have them pick up the phone and make the calls, and let's try a little bit behind the scenes type of strategies, because that usually we don't see all of that, and it's easy to forget that it's the combination of the outside and inside that moves things along. Um, there's so much I could say about that, even with like Ricky being an elected official and how that happened, inside outside strategy. But yeah, sorry I interrupted you.
No, this is exactly what I was processing too. And I see in the comments, let's see, Valentina, we have a Valentina.
Ah, my baby.
Talking about is, yes, it's more about complementing each other with pieces that fit, not competing. And I
Yes.
find that so often our community, and I would say communities of color, this is a common narrative too, getting pit against each other.
Yes.
And when we're really trying to work towards a very similar goal, which in many ways is freedom for our communities to be
Absolutely.
able to also shift a lot of the whether it's different systems of oppression that have really negatively impacted the lives, the livelihoods of our community, etc. But the way white supremacy works is very much pitting people against each other so that you focus on something else. You're not really focusing on the issues at hand, but it's a distraction.
Yeah. Early in my career, so this was early 2000s, the beef that Latinx groups had with each other was literally around nationality, like, why are all the Latinx groups, it's a valid question. Why are all the Latinx groups led by South Americans and not Mexicanos? And valid question. And also, like, what are we doing to step up? Because it feels to me irresponsible when we're like pointing the finger and always like challenging. Anyone can like challenge and question things, but like where we are having a crisis of leadership is that we don't have enough people stepping up and saying, yes, I'll run for office and I'll stick my neck out there. And because it's a hard job, it's so easy to sit back and criticize, but to actually contribute and to actually build and to have that sustained and grow, it's so much harder. And yeah, I don't know what you said that sparked that thought, but like earlier on in my career, I remember seeing this competitive aspect of like people being pit against each other. And at that time, it was a lot of the founder EDs for El Pueblo and El Vínculo Hispano, El Centro Hispano, a lot of the founding EDs, when we should have all also been, call the question, but also celebrate the fact that we were finally taking up space. And then stepping up and saying, okay, well, they're leading right now, but maybe I could be an apprentice. Maybe I can step up and ask like how I can learn what they're doing so that eventually when I can join the organization or so I can step up into leadership. And right now, like I'm always looking for my replacement, so investing in
Same.
people.
Like,
Yeah.
it's about, very much, I think we're share similar
Mm-hmm.
philosophies and perspectives on leadership development too. And like, how are we really unpacking that, but in a really critical lens, and also thinking about who we are in that
Mm-hmm.
equation. A book that I have been preaching about for quite some time. I'm like, all my students and alumni, everybody's probably heard me say this book at some point, but it's called Leadership on the Line. And Google it, mi gente, buy it. It's especially if you're interested in leadership and thinking about how role and identity can really manifest. And honestly, again, leadership being defined as taking action for positive transformation or positive change, like really getting into that definition. But part of the tagline of that book is staying alive in the dangers of leading. And part of that piece too is that there is a risk in leadership too, which is I think where the fear and the doubt come from for people like putting themselves out there, because it is the fear and the scariness of it all, that's real. It is a risk, and then learning how to navigate that risk and how to best position yourself, how to protect your role, how to preserve your role,
Yes.
and thinking about how a lot of the stuff isn't also, it's not personal. It's systemic, it's organizational. It's like all these different factors that when I think I started learning more about that framework, it started to be like, ooh, okay, this is really interesting. In many ways, by stepping up and being the leader and just giving an example, I'm the messenger, so if I have a message that people don't really like, or that they're, not getting to, often they turn and just by human nature, get the person who's the messenger rather than the message, right? And so that's where we've seen a lot of our leaders, especially in social justice work, really go down, is because people, the message that they were saying was too quote unquote radical. Now we look at it back and we're like, that makes total sense. But at the time, super radical. So again, just the name of the book is called Leadership on the Line. I'll grab it maybe in a second and show it, but I'll definitely drop the link. But it's it's a game-changing book, especially thinking about leadership. So thank you already, Edina, for mentioning that importance to think about how we are stepping up to and taking action. And then what I love about Poder and Latinx Ed is that we're also trying to give our young leaders tools to be able to navigate that once they are in those positions. Like, how do we have a shared language around how we're operating internally, but then once we get into the world, right, where other people are differing backgrounds, etc., that they're ready to negotiate, to navigate, but also know how to protect themselves in the process and preserve themselves, because it's a risk, right? And that's part of the process.
It's a risk, and it's so lonely. Like everyone, we all see the leaders of different organizations, the leaders in our society and politically and all of that, but and we see, leaders speaking to media, and we see the like positive side or the fun side, but what we don't see is like how lonely it is to actually be in these positions. And my entire career, I was like, I do not want to be an executive director. I do not want to be an executive director. And then things just happened, and I like became the executive director of my organization. And but that wasn't the plan originally. But and part of why I was always so reluctant to do it is not just because, of the pressure of fundraising and for everyone's livelihood, but also because there really isn't, especially for women of color, there isn't a lot of support. I did just an informal survey of other EDs recently, and 17 EDs, 15 from North Carolina, responded, and 2 from out of state, and every single one of them said that they didn't feel supported, and that not just because of like the leadership structures, because executive directors report to a board of directors, but like just not having a cohort of people to talk to, or to like, share some of the hard decisions that need to be made. And especially for me on this side of political work, like there's a very time pressure, crunch that happens where like really hard decisions have to be made, and there isn't a lot of time to do consensus and to do all the things that ideally could happen, but that, um, and expediency during an election becomes the biggest uh, driver for decision making, at least for me. But one of the things that I've found is that when I speak to other women, especially Black and other women of color who are in similar positions, and when I come 100% vulnerable, sharing like these are the things that I'm struggling with, and because all of us still struggle with imposter syndrome. Like I grew up in the hood in East Durham, and like what the hell am I doing leading this organization? And those voices still exist, but it's, figuring out and surrounding myself with people that can have real talk with me, but then also like be there when I do fall because I do. And when I make mistakes, because I do. So.
Mm. That type of community support, and community being, like you're saying, for example, using this example, other women of color in these types of leadership positions, it's a game changer versus doing it on your own, or that feeling of being alone too. Even the experience is really important too, and how the process
Yeah.
is. Again, another reason I'm grateful for you. Okay, I'll put that out there. But I one of the questions that I had was talking about the barriers that you had identified to that limit access and engagement from our community in the political process. And that sounds like one, when you step into the leadership field, that can be one. If you don't have
Yeah.
that support group or that network, that's also going to be hold you accountable. That's going to be truth telling, but that they have your best interests at heart. Those
Yeah.
confidants, but then also the allies too, that can really help kind of support and help you navigate different spaces. So any other barriers that you'd like to just name for
Oh
our,
my God, yes.
yeah,
The
go for
one that like the one that inspired the work of Poder and all of this is when I was growing up, my mom has a third grade education. My dad has no formal education. And I remember one of the things that they would always say is, we want you to go to school porque no queremos que seas burra como nosotros. We don't want you to be, dumbass or, dumb like us. And I remember thinking, like, what are they talking about? Like at that time, like, of course I thought like they mean they didn't go to school, but like my dad with no formal education started a really successful business, was one of the first, if not the first Latino to start a construction contracting business in like 92, something like that. And was able to pull us out of poverty. And so I was like, what are they talking about? But what I realized is that there is this lack of confidence, lack of love for ourselves, because maybe, at least when I think of my parents, and this is so much like psychoanalyzing, which I'm not an expert, but like when I see my parents, I'm like, who poured into them? Like, who loved on them? My mom comes from a family of 16. My dad comes from a family of 10. He's been working since he was 5. My mom left home when she was like 11, and she came to this country solita when she was 16. And like, when they're like a walking miracle to me, because they're people who didn't get poured into, didn't get this love and investment of anyone, like no one. And they just like hustled, but they poured from somehow from their very meager cups into me. And so while I've like, had to do therapy and do a lot to love and appreciate myself, it took me a while. What I realized is that there's a crisis in our community of lack of self-love and lack of like confidence in our abilities. And that, if we don't have that, then we're not going to have the audacity to go anywhere and demand nothing. Like, we're not going to go and say, you owe us clean water, you owe us, you know um uh education, free education, or sound education. And because we are settling. And so I am part of a generation that has seen my parents shrink themselves for survival. And I adopted that earlier on as a young professional. But as I've grown, and like, this is where experience really matters, where like just the years of like experiencing shit culminates and matter, because it's been now, like, it's only been in my 30s and my mid 30s where I'm like, where I actually have the audacity and believe that I'm deserving of the same thing that, like, Kathy over here, Karen over here has, and am like gonna be bold about it. And so one of the premises for Poder is, and one of the reasons why I made the decision to pay all of our volunteers $20 an hour, and that's just like commitment of like, I'm going to pay our volunteers $20 an hour, because yes, they're still volunteering. It's still their time and their choice of where they're going to pour, and give of themselves. And their time is worth something, especially during a pandemic. But because when you get paid, you begin to see yourself in a different way. Oh, my time is worth something.
Mm.
Oh, I am, I can at least, request $20 an hour because that's how much I'm getting paid over here. And um, another choice is paying our staff starting $50,000 a year, fresh out of college. And that decision is because it took me 12 years to get to a $50,000 salary, 12 years of like relentless work. No one should have to work that long to make a salary to be able to provide for their families or for themselves, but I didn't have the confianza in myself to like demand better pay. Like I just settled and I was always settling. And it's only now that I'm like, well, fuck y'all, it shouldn't be done that way. And now I can change it because, okay, y'all said I'd be the ED. This is how we're going to do it. And I want other Latinx North Carolinians to feel that and to really feel the love that we have for them, and to really begin to believe that they're worth it, that they're valuable, that they have a lot to contribute, that we're not coming out here to like and sometimes I have a difficult relationship with the word empower. We're not trying to empower you. You already have the power. I'm just trying to tease it out and to show you this is what you know. Um, and so that's probably like the biggest thing is like, oof, that's the biggest barrier because we put it on ourselves because we learned it and it's so hard to overcome. Like I've been in therapy since 2009. So like it takes a while. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability there, because I feel like that real talk, and for those of y'all listening, I think part of why this conversation is so refreshing for me, and I'm wondering if that's resonating with you, is because we don't get this type of like real
Yeah.
talk and authenticity often, especially in for those who are in positions of leadership. Often these are
Mm-hmm.
conversations behind closed doors, the hush hush. You don't want anyone to
Yeah.
see your imperfections, your
Yes.
weaknesses, your failures, because then it just, that what you already named with imposter syndrome or imposter training, right? The systems that
Yeah.
have trained us to feel like imposters starts to, really manifest. And I want to recap on a few. You were dropping the real talk, okay? Because I was looking at my notes are, all over the place here. But you start off with talking about your family and such obvious and evident love for your family. And I share the same. And I'm always looking at my mom, being like, "How did you,
Yeah,
survive?
girl.
How did you shape me? I have 5 younger siblings. How did we all make it?" It's always like this feels like a miracle in many ways to
Yeah.
have made it this far, and to have the freedoms that I have now that my mom didn't have when she was in my position. And I just
Yeah.
feel so much gratitude. But I also remember her and even my grandparents and their lane of work or their level of education being really posited as a deficit, and it started something that I started to internalize as a young person, being like, the reason part of why I'm trying to get my education so I'm not like them. And that was so, I mean, getting to this position, I'm like, that was so messed up.
Yeah.
And again, I understand why I was thinking that way, because that's the messages that were being fed to me of that. And also there was this piece of survival too, that education
Yeah.
was also seen as this way to get out of that and to get out of the cycle of poverty that my family comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been learning a lot about is essentially moving away from that deficit, or being able to pay attention when things are being posited in a deficit based lens
Yeah.
versus an asset based lens. And it's something that is so important for everyone, whether in education, policy, anything you're working with people, period, is to
Yeah.
think about when we are creating messages that are already positioning people as if they are lacking, um,
Yes.
and completely and at the same time, wait, while it may not feel like that, just to certain actions may seem really passive on the surface, it's actually making people less worthy. Whether that's because of those actions, or feel less worthy, or be less worthy, or really, it's really attacking their humanity, period. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's really, we have to get that deep with it, because it's then creating narratives that then are internalized to what you're
Yes.
talking about, where we start to believe those lies, we start to believe it and then start to internalize it. Then it impacts how we show up on a daily basis, not just on, on those certain moments. It's actually something that's really driving our brain. But I guess the one thing that I will wrap it up and turn it back to you, because I'm telling you, dropping the real talk today, is deficit-based thinking and versus asset-based thinking. You said something before that I want to bring back, which is a scarcity mindset too, versus a mindset of abundance, and thinking about how much power, how much beauty and strength that we have as a community. And we start to shift and operate from that lane, which, to break it even down even further, and this is using the work of Dr. Anise Fisher here to break this down with conscious leadership framework. But one simple way to test yourself, and this is just for folks who are trying to get real intentional and really self-aware with how you're operating, and in whatever position you are, whatever role you are, this is something to think about when you're in this moment. And you're experiencing certain emotions, right? And you're thinking, maybe those emotions are fear, or maybe it's anger, or maybe it's something negative, right? Often we can pinpoint whether that emotion is coming from two lanes. One lane is fear and doubt. Like, this is fear and doubt. It's really like those emotions right now are rooted in fear. So for an example is, if I am thinking about myself, like, who am I to be in this position, right? Like, who am I? I don't, just starting to doubt. All of that's doubt in who I am. So that emotion of like anxiety or fear that I'm experiencing in that moment, I can root it back into that lane. But the opposite lane, which you could think about as abundance, is trust and love. So if I was trusting in myself and my ability, then that's how I can shift the way I'm operating, because I'm recognizing my emotion, which emotion and recognizing your emotion is so important, because those are your body's symptoms. It's your body telling you what you're experiencing in the deepest parts of you. And so often, I feel like to make it, I've had to ignore those emotions. And now that I'm in a different space and a different time, I can actually let those surface and get real with what they are. So when I'm feeling those emotions, one of the tricks that Dr. Anise has taught me is to think about, okay, take a moment. Am I acting out of trust and love right now? Or am I operating out of fear and doubt right now? And just getting real with myself for a second. And what I found is, it takes time to release certain mindsets that have once protected us. I'll put that out there, because our brain is wired to protect us, but because we've had to go through, experiences of survival, especially in where our work is in the educational survival complex out here, right? And so there's certain mindsets that protect us, but when we move out and we have more freedom, or if we have a different circumstance and we take it with us, it no longer serves us. So we have to release it. And so for me, and just getting in those moments of being like, what am I operating out of right now? And where is that emotion that's important that I'm recognizing in myself? Where is it coming from? And being able to say, now, if I was to, often I recognize that it is out of fear and doubt, or I'm doubting myself. And then I take a moment, I'm like, if I was to operate out of trust and love right now, what would it look like? What would it be? And then challenging myself to move and operate differently. And those are skills. That is like, that is something, that's a muscle there that so often our young people, I think about myself, like, I didn't have access to that knowledge or that information until I was much older. And just thinking about, and I can see you doing the work, Eden, and I'm doing the work too, of trying to really be able to release certain, whether it's mindsets or things that have been really also influenced because of the structure and the systems and the policies that are in place that are really holding our community back. But then now internalizing that must mean that we're not worthy of and then internalizing that message, which is so damaging, which is what you're breaking down. You broke down for us, which I really appreciate that piece. So I wanted to share that, because when you said scarcity mindset too, or operating out of scarcity, I felt that in the deepest level.
And especially, it's real. Like, we nonprofits, we're all it's like Hunger Games, like put into a situation where we're like fundraising. A lot of times it's going up to the same funders and trying to hustle so that we can keep our organizations up and running and doing the work, and like that matters. But imagine what would it look like if all of us banded together, went to this, the funders, and we shared, because here's the thing that we don't talk a lot about is like um, the big funders are essentially doing a favor to all these like very wealthy individuals who donate, because it's a tax write-off for a lot of the like your organization. It would be a tax write-off, not for mine because of the type of work that we do, but for most organizations in the ecosystem that are 501c3s, they're like cleaning the money for them. Like it's like philanthropic money laundering, essentially. And so why can't we, the EDs for C3 organizations band together and demand, funders that, they begin to really operate from a values-led place. And there's so much more that we can accomplish together. I strongly believe that. And because, when you look at the seal for North Carolina, it's a cornucopia, which represents bounty. In this pandemic, a lot of our families have been suffering, job losses and all of that, but the richest people have gotten way richer. So like, and a lot of them live here in North Carolina. So like, why can't we call the question? We're so focused on fighting within ourselves and within our communities, or we're so busy trying to like hustle for survival, that the people who really like hold the financial power keep getting away with the same things, because the system was built in that way. But what would it look like if all of us that are in these ecosystems band together to call the question of, how are y'all really living into your values? Because we see that your portfolio just gained several billions of dollars, and here in North Carolina, we haven't even expanded Medicaid, and people are going without medicines that they need. Um, and I guess also everything is political. Like everything boils back to policy and decisions that are being made in your name, in my name. Um, and if we aren't stepping up and really using our voice to really call the questions, these decisions like Tom Tillis voting to not impeach Trump, those kinds of decisions are done, are made in our name, and they're saying my constituents, North Carolinians, support this position. And if we're not using our voices, then they can continue to live the rest of their lives thinking that they were doing that for us. And they really believe that. That's the thing too, is they really believe that. And there's a whole conversation around accountability that I've been having with our team at Poder about, a lot of us talk about holding people accountable. And a friend of mine started to help me reframe that. And she was like, we can't hold people accountable who will never see the errors in their ways, who will never see what their actions are as harmful. You can't hold someone like Tom Tillis or Phil Berger accountable. What happens, because they're never going to say, I'm sorry, I messed up, and this is how I plan on not messing up and hurting Black and Brown communities in our state. What has to happen in those situations is punishment. And what that looks like is recruiting people to run against them, making sure that we're calling them incessantly so that we are the thorn on their side, because we aren't going to hold them accountable, especially someone like Madison Cawthorn, who represents, out Western North Carolina, who is a neo-Nazi and is representing North Carolinians in Congress, and who was with the insurrectionists on January 6th. They will never apologize because they don't think they're wrong. So the only option, it's not accountability, it's punishment and getting them out of office. I'm not saying anything like, harmful, doing anything harmful to them, but I'm saying like, you don't deserve to represent North Carolinians. We can have, Republicans. There are probably Republicans out there. For most of my life, there were Republicans that, um, there were disagreements around how finances should be done in a state, but there weren't differences about, like, at least the one, like, wanting to see me dead, they've always been around, right? But um yeah, that's a conversation that we're having, is like, we're not talking about accountability for a lot of people. Accountability with Democrats who fuck up, absolutely, because they have to be in relationship with our communities because they're closer aligned in values to our communities. And so will, they can be held accountable because I could see them apologizing for missteps and mistakes. um, but with folks who don't want to see you alive, like, you're never going to get an apology. Therefore, you're never going to get accountability.
That's so interesting. I've been thinking a lot about accountability this week for like honestly, some silly reasons, but also some deep reasons because I feel like everything is connected. Pay attention out there, what's happening in the
Hmm.
world. Um, I wonder if I'm just positing a idea here that this is also a reflection of leadership too, or thinking about leadership as a role. Because
Hmm.
if for those politicians, right, that are representing or have been voted or elected into office, right, their position is to be representative of their constituents. Like they are, but here's the thing that I get into fights with people about, just arguments, is that that role, they're not entitled to that role. Like that
Mm-mm.
role isn't something that is, like when we think about accountability too, I feel like part of what accountability looks like is also firing people, or like, and I'm thinking about a different
Absolutely.
context, right? And you're saying punishment, but it also looks like it's stripping you of your title, right? Like that's
Hmm.
just a literal, that's maybe a repercussion for that individual, but ultimately they no longer are serving their role in the way that their constituents want.
Hmm.
So part of the, again, back to that risk of leadership too, or the risk of leading period, is that that role is not entitled to you. So you can be
Right.
fired, but that's not, it's in many ways, it is personal for when, in the context that you're talking about, with folks that have been, like, their humanity has been threatened by these people in office. And it's also not personal. It's also to your point, political, right?
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
also organizational, and it's also part of the way that leadership works. That is, if you're not leading and representing your in the community and the constituents that have been designated to serve, you're not entitled to that position.
That's right.
And it is part of, I think, thinking about the people who are in power and in
Hmm.
leadership positions that are in these modes, thinking about accountability too in that way, is that, if they're not representing us, let's get somebody else in there, which means really orchestrating, supporting, and figuring out candidates who can then better serve, and really supporting them to get to
Absolutely.
that point. And it's all hands on deck
Yeah.
situation.
Absolutely. Like right now, and a key example is Senator Ted Cruz in Texas. And like, they're going through one of the worst natural disasters ever in Texas. I reached out to some of our hermanas who have family down there, and they're like going through it. And this man got on a plane to go to Cancun when his state is like literally freezing to death. Like, how does someone like that deserve, like, why would someone like that be serving? Like, as you know, I do candidate recruitment and training as well. And like, what I look for when I'm looking for leaders is people who genuinely love people. And I'm not saying like people who only align with them in values or like political party or like I said, but like, if you are a lover of people, then and if you are committed to community and are consistent and you have the time, then you will be a good leader. And you have at least the raw ingredients for that. But if you're someone who can't even say why it is that you're running for office beyond, like, fattening your portfolio and resume, and then who are you serving? Like, it's being called into service. Like, you are in service of people. And what we're seeing with so many elected leaders is like this desire to run for office for ego, for power, but like power for them and their families, but not power for the people, not power, for a broader community. And that's why we're in this like crisis as a democracy, is we don't have people that actually care about the country. Mitch McConnell was in power for so long, and yeah, it's a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, we drop in the real talk, and I'm like, wait a minute. I knew 1:30 was going to sneak up on us, and it was going to. Okay, anyways, we're going to go a little bit over if that's okay. And thank you to our audience with sticking with us, because I do want to get into talking about poder and
Mm-hmm.
see and getting really into the nitty gritty of key strategies that y'all have been using. I want also to invite our audience, if y'all received one of those dope mailers from Poder, drop a little shout out, because those flyers were awesome. I'm just getting in the mail was just it was inspiring for me, and I'm sure a lot of other folks out here. So if you got a mailer, drop a little shout out. But just wanted to talk about the key strategies that Poder NC is using to mobilize, especially Latinx civic engagement, and ways that Poder has already begun to impact our community. We'd love to get into that.
Yeah. So last year we sent over 1 million of those mailers. And y'all, these mailers are expensive. Like it costs a lot of money to send these. And so that was why I was like, we can't just send out some BS, like I'm hustling out here for this money, and we got to make something that lasts, something that people will see and will be like, oh, this is dope. And then like put it on their fridge. And I have like, it really fills my heart that people have kept it, and that like no one keeps political mailers, but like we're starting to change the game. So that's really exciting. And shout out to Nikki Rodriguez, one of our hermanas from Row Chapter, NC State University, who was the person who brought these mailers to life and really like designed the shit out of them. But we made over 1 million phone calls as well. And we had a really strong digital ads game where we were running digital ads on Pandora, on social media outlets. And we, right after the election, once it was done, we circled back with our voters to say, and these are the people who won, and this is what the outcome was. That never happens in with this kind of work. Like people go through the election cycle, they call and bombard you with text messages and phone calls, but then they never follow up to be like, and this is actually what the outcome of the election was. And so I didn't want to have, that's what I consider like a one night stand politically. And I wanted to like begin to build a relationship with our voters. And so we circled back and did this text message campaign where we told them what happened with the election. The other thing that we also began to change was that we collaborated intentionally with the other Latinx organizations that were doing political work. And that was really important to me, because if we weren't in communication with each other, we would have probably been stepping on each other's toes the whole time and being like really ineffective even. It could have been damaging. So we had regular calls with Mi Gente, with Fortaleza and NC Latino Power. And it was one of the best times for me, because we're all Latinas, leading this kind of work. And now we're going to kick off some our People Power School, where we're going to have a few different tracks to train people who want to run, Latinx folks who want to run for office, and folks who want to learn how to work on campaigns, and then folks who want to know how power operates in their community and in the state. And so we're going to have this school where we're going to train them on all of those things. It's a $10,000 stipend. And the point of this is that these fellows will be embedded into our chapters, and they're going to be the point people in our chapters that are going to share the information of what they're learning with us, of like, this is what's happening in our city council. Should we coordinate an action, to raise awareness about this. And they're the ones that are going to call the shots on what bills they're going to amplify when it comes to General Assembly and Congress, because we can't dictate from Raleigh what someone in Boone or someone in Sampson or Chatham should be doing. Like, they should be calling those shots. We're just providing them with the tools and the training and the opportunities and the resources. And then they like take that and run. So like, when I say we're going to invest meaningfully in people, like, I really mean it. And I'm really excited about that because I love working with young people. And yeah, those are the things that like fill my cup and I'm really excited about. And we'll also have a tech fellowship, and we're going to train folks on, especially high schoolers, on these tools for how to create the tools that could be effective in moving civic engagement and like informing people. And so there's several different opportunities.
Awesome. And shameless plug, can you share with folks how they can stay in the loop with, like, especially once these opportunities like come to fruition, like
Yeah.
it's so
So our website and also our Facebook page. So just, Google Poder en Sí Action, and those will be available. And in Georgia, there's organizations. Mi Gente has been doing amazing work down there. GLAR, Georgia Latino Association, I forget the rest of it, GLAHR. And there was a group of North Carolinians that are Siembra members and also Mi Gente members, and they went down to Georgia to help with the Senate race. And so there's folks in our own communities who can provide more insight as to, other resources in Georgia. But those are two that New Georgia Project is another one as well.
that's awesome. I'm so excited. First of all, like I remember back when you were working with was it Lead and See?
Uh-huh.
Lead and See, I got to attend one of the kind of like, it's just civic engagement trainings, but thinking about being a candidate and thinking about like what it means to be in a campaign and just being in those workshops, and also thinking about leadership and the kind of leadership that, thinking about one's own personal, role as a leader and what our skills and our strengths are. It was such it was an awesome experience, and there was so much information that was then turned into knowledge for me about kind of how I wanted to operate and thinking about how to organize and get people together to work towards a goal. And so I am loving everything that's coming out. That's so
Yeah, and I think, for us, it's a lot about redefining the wins this year. Like I said earlier, we know that we're not going to have legislative wins, so the win for us is going to be measured by how many relationships are we actually building, and this will come into full circle next year. Next year is a huge Senate race. We will have one of the most prominent Senate races in the country. And so, we're continuing we will be doing voter registration the rest of this year and voter education, just to begin to lay the groundwork for next year. We'll be running some digital work later in the year as well. And knowledge doesn't stop just because the election ended. We got to continue to make that investment in our community, and that way they're confident when they go vote, and they feel like it's almost like you have the answers to the test, and when you have the answers to a test, you show up and you're like, yes, I got this. But if you didn't study and you don't know, like, you have like so much anxiety and like, get sick and whatever.
That's so real. But that confidence, being able to walk in there and be like, I know what
Yep.
I'm doing. And that's ways
Yep.
that we can combat those feelings of feeling like an imposter and
That's
feeling
right.
like, we don't
Preparedness.
belong,
Yeah.
right? Is feeling like, no, I have the knowledge and I have my skill sets together, that I know how to operate this because I also have a community behind me. So those feelings, there's nothing like that feeling of feeling like, yes, I can walk up in here and I know exactly what I'm doing. And even if I don't, I'm gonna act like I do until, we make
That's
it
right.
through. So well, I know we're wrapping up, but I just wanted to shout out some people in the chat because, y'all have been awesome, just dropping so much real talk. A lot of love for the mailers. People have it up in their office, on their fridge. So thank you so much for joining. I see Jenna just dropping so much real talk too, our hermana, and holding it down in Georgia. So thank you so much, Jenna. And Shelby, thank you so much for your feedback too. Shelby was like, y'all need to do a podcast. I swear. If someone tells me one more time, I'm like ready. I'm ready to do podcasts. Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm open. Yes, let's do it.
I love this though. And all my students, thank you so much for showing up and also being so engaged. I always love reflecting on all of your comments here. Already one quote from Esperanza that was quoting, I think something you said, which was, if they're not representing us, let's get them out of here.
Yeah. Like we were calling our entire body of work last year internally. We were like, Operation Fuck Shit Up, because like systems that aren't working for us, like why are they still standing? Like we have to figure out a way. And one of the things that we did differently that no one had done in North Carolina was investing money and reaching out to unregistered but likely eligible Latinas. No one had reached out to them. It was 84,000 unregistered, likely eligible to vote Latinas. And that's why we created the Somos Poderosas mailer, with all the Latinas on it. And on the back of it, it was a love letter of like, these are the reasons why, we are asking you to consider registering to vote. But that was the last thing. Like the first several things that we talked about is love for our community, love for our family, all the things that we do to pour into others. And the thing that we can do that's, low hanging fruit is showing up to vote. And so we'll know in the next few months whether any of those 84,000 Latinas actually registered to vote and turned out to vote. But it's when we're sitting in these positions of influence and power that we can think about and begin to pull folks along that no one else, who's been in power has thought, to invest in, because they're like, these are considered low propensity voters. I consider them high opportunity voters. Like they're low propensity. They don't show up to vote because you haven't talked to them. Like, why would you show up if no one's been talking to you about the elections?
100%.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, our time has come
Thank
to an
you.
end. It was so juicy and so much real talk. And I'm always just so in awe of you.
I
And
love you, Elaine. I'm in awe of you with the baby. Psh, yes.
I remember right when you got pregnant, I remember we had a conversation. We were talking about motherhood, and motherhood has definitely just like changed my whole life. So that's
Ooh,
probably a
girl.
part two.
That is definitely a part two. Yes.
But I just admired you in so many of the different roles that you play, and how you've, worn so many hats so seamlessly, and also being so vulnerable and real with also just the journey, because it's not one of perfection, but it's been one of progress. And it's just been awesome to see you just flourish and be on your journey. And anyways, I could keep raving because I'm like, oh, but I want to thank everybody for showing up and tuning into this conversation, and for joining us in the chat. It's always an honor and a blessing to be a part of our community. And so just to be able to have these real talk conversations with you all too, continue, we have more Cafecitos coming up. So if you'd like to tune in for more, definitely sign up for our newsletter, because we share all of the updates that are coming up, but also Poder and see has a newsletter too. So definitely get subscribed, and we'll drop some links in the comments just so you know where to go and get plugged in. But those newsletters are always coming out with some really juicy opportunities to just feel connected, especially in this virtual world. There's ways that we can continue mobilizing. So thank you so much for your time, and
of course. Thank
love you so much. And
I love you, Elaine. Thank you for having me. And folks that are listening or watching, look out for those fellowships. Like, we would love to have you. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your week. And, till next time. Ciao. And with that, ciao.
Adios. Mine's gone.
Bye.